I'm not sure that I'm known for things. In fact, I feel a bit of a fraud in some ways, sitting here and talking about having a time. I didn't even grow up in a city. I grew up on a farm, and for me that was a community cluster of housing per farm. The community space is mapped out by the arrangement of houses, the circle of sheds, park machinery, and the creek. Lines of poplars marking the edges and the fence lines and the tracks, oak trees shading the yards, so sort of sequences of cultural overlays there, a big landscape. Living, working, playing 24/7 in one environment, intergenerational living, like Graeme babysat, and creative energy was distributed evenly across work systems, the house, the shed, arranging the sheep yards. Actually, on the sheep yards, I remember taking Ryan Jim, he was doing a postgrad in Victoria for a trip to the farm, and he made the comment, looking down on the woolshed in the yards, of how much it reminded him of towns in China and the kind of issues about manipulation through kind of cold years of how people are organised and arranged. This was the kind of environment, and so I guess the idea, like I said, of an even distribution across all these realms, and it would include making the thinking the farm, running the school, adding to the hall, the garden, and a bedroom for the kids, and so on. There's an attitude about sustainability, partly because it wasn't that great, it wasn't that reliable. So I guess there was a kind of sense of self-sufficiency and something about resilience there. So maybe this is kind of DIY for villagism. And in some ways, and part of Julia's question was, I guess, about influences. I guess that was my first context, and I guess began to think about things beyond that. I guess the next thing, for me anyway, as an influence was the School of Architecture here at Victoria University. And I arrived there about the same time as teachers like Clarence Arson was there, and Paul Walker. And parents had massive energy, I'm sure many of you remember him. And he, a pretty uncompromising approach, he told us to stop fussing about with singular domestic objects in the big landscape, and that to make a difference we needed to get involved in the city. He taught a course on cities that involved painstakingly drawn by hand a range of big cities in the world, diagramming out layers of spatial structure, figure ground, networks, connections, edges, etc. I think in the hope that we'd absorb a good sense of urban texture through our drawing hand. And he pushed the idea of design interventions being foremost a very clear and formal response to these layers of existing context, as a complement or a critique of sight, physical, cultural, historical. I know in our last year we did a bit of a model of Venice as part of an entry to Gatley Venice competition, and it displaced the economics machine at the time on various other things that had been set up at the school at that time. So it was a time when the school, I guess, was changing just before it came into town. And for the last 18 years, my context as an architect has been with Athfield architects. And so that's another community. And it's hard not to be influenced by Ath and others who progressively shaped the office design approach. Ath had been teaching at school for 2 when I was there, and he was traversing some of these approaches that Clarence and others have talked about, but locally and in his own language. The Wellington Library and Civic Centre was being built then, and when I joined the office in the early 90s, I spent about 3 years through developed design, working drawings and contract admin for Palmerston North Library, working under Ath and Ian Dixon and Claire through the fit out. And, although it happened at a time when the RMA was just changing, and it happened before consent officers were ticking the boxes for active features, passive surveillance, gateways, these kind of urban design things that language that we're more familiar with now. It was pretty Wild West, but it was quite ambitious and had a whole lot of issues, I guess, in terms of urban design terms. Things like taking on most of the city block next to the square, the idea of being the city's living room next to the square, the city's garden. Urban renewal, the city council as developer, revenue generation from repaired ground floor tenancies, transformation of a precinct, George Street, took on a whole lot of coffee over 2 or 3 years. It might have coincided with coffee arriving generally, but it was good timing. Mixing up retail, coffee with community facility, reading and learning, breaking down the thresholds to institutions like the library, in a way that the library could do this week. And space that weaves inside and out through new and old buildings, inversion of inside and out, street building, urban furniture, integrated public art, and so on. And I think, quite importantly, the idea of unfinished edges, which I think is quite relevant to discussion also about, I guess, the approach to Christchurch, about where we kind of stop, about where we have involvement and where we stop as architects or design. So projects like that one, for me, and I think a number of people in the office, were fairly influential in developing a kind of an approach aligned with urban design, consistent across most of the design streams we are now in. So my urban design credentials, to the extent they exist, come by my experience through those projects rather than formal qualification. And those projects, I guess, since then have covered architecture, interior, landscape, master planning, art, and infrastructure. And I guess my take on urban design approach through that, and I've heard people like Stuart Niven and others speak of it like this, is that although it generally involves interactions within the city, this need only be as urban as an intersection with a building on each corner, opposite corners, to make it an exercise in urban consideration. And it's more about an approach or an attitude to design, or where to hold back on design, than necessarily a type, scale, location, or design product. I should note that although I've been on the Christchurch Urban Design Panel for a few years, and prior to the earthquake, my primary interest and experience is at the design generative front, haphazard and varied depending on the circumstance and project, rather than, say, guideline writing or assessment or review. And a bit like sustainability, although it's now separated out as a field of its own, fundamentally I think most of us involved in design in the office see it as a consideration, an inherent part of communicating, listening and doing architecture rather than a separate layer. So I think that's
Which city did you draw for Clarence Aston?
Actually, Hackhammer's a bit of a parasite in that course, and watched several cities being drawn again. So I wanted to have them drawn.
I was interested because I drew Babylon and it was like this, and everyone else in the class had it like this.
What scale was yours?
Very long time ago, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Julia. Well, I guess by coincidence, like John, I also came off a farm. I guess I could right now be milking cows. I'm pleased I'm doing urban design, although I suspect I'd be a lot more wealthy if I was milking cows. I guess I came to urban design as you should in any good school of architecture. I was lucky enough to be, when I went through the school at Vic, way back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was an urban designer there called David Reed, who had, he was trained in America, and he, with one other, set up the urban design course at Oxford Polytechnic, which was then one of the places to go for urban design training. And David ran 2 urban design courses at that time, nearly 30 years ago now, and I found it just really, really fascinating, and that really sparked my interest. I was also taken by a book written by actually a guy from Oxford Polytechnic, called Byron Vitalities, and it was called Architecture for People. And it was really it included a whole lot of behaviour environment research. And this was late 70s, early 80s, when people were interested in that type of work, understanding how people relate with their physical environment and interiors in the public environment and so on. In fact, there were organisations like EDRA, the Environment Design Research Association, that was in the States, and in New Zealand and Australia, paper that people in physical environment research. So there was great interest in that. That sparked my interest, and it brings to mind to me, that narrow program I won't obviously it's around something like what is important is the people, it is the people, it is the people. And to me that's fundamental about urban design. That's what you always go back to. The other thing which sparked my enthusiasm in urban design, and I think it's still relevant, is Gordon Cullen's Townscape. Cullen and Townscape in 60s in the UK, that urban design in the UK was all about townscape, understanding the visual aspects of cities, and he developed these wonderful sketches, examining towns and cities, and he put words around to understand what was happening in parts of what you saw on the street and spaces and how they worked. And I just found that just really fascinating. It just opened my mind to some of the aspects of how people use cities. Now, it's interesting that people look back at Cullen and they're quite right. They say, he treated urban design as pruning and gardening, so just tweaking this and tweaking that and adjusting and so on. And that's right, you can look at the structure, but it was really, really fascinating stuff about how people experience cities visually. And he came up with the idea of serial vision. I guess the other influence at the time, I was lucky enough to bump into Stuart Niven up at the school back in 1982, and he was up there working on, he may have been working with you at the time, he was working on precinct plans for the university. And I had a chat with Stuart for about an hour towards the end of the design course. I think he was in there for that, and we just talked about postgrad study at Oxford Poly, and I thought, well, gosh, this is interesting. I would quite like to do that. And I guess the thing which I really enjoy about urban design, it's about joined-up thinking. The sort of issues that you've got in Christchurch, that's about the social issues, the cultural, historical heritage issues, the big economic issues, and there's a role for people involved in design, in architecture and urban design, to get involved with. You've got to think about a whole range of things, and that's really challenging. Sometimes it's not rocket science, but some of the problems I've got in Christchurch are definitely extremely complex and challenging. I would say that it's not rocket science, but something else incredibly complex. And of course, you've got to consider the bigger picture, which is good, obviously. Now, I've on the strength of conversations with David Reed and Stuart Niven, I went over to Oxford Poly for the course there in the mid-80s and came back here just at the end of the property boom in 87. And that was before, it was interesting at that time, you couldn't do postgraduate urban design, and you may have been able to do it in South Africa. There was nothing in Australia at the time, as I recall. There was nothing in New Zealand. You had to go to the States, or you had to go to the UK. Now, some of the things which really got me on the way were, Stuart asked me to help out with the London City Council design guides, and I did a big chunk of those in the early 90s. And then the project which still sticks in my mind is something really important. I guess I'm still on it, is the waterfront concept plan, which the whole process started in 96, but the concept plan was done in 97 in a 6-week process with myself and Stuart and Chris and Penny and Megan and a cast of about 50 others. These things happen. It's never just a small group of people, it's a big group of people. And I've also, in fact, enjoyed teaching urban design with Chris McDonald at Gatley. I guess some of the, just coming up with the things which I think are, for me, defining thoughts about urban design. I've got, to keep it short, I've got 3 of them. The first is that achieving good urban outcomes is a long process. It's often a battle, and it involves many people and many disciplines. It can be bloody difficult, but because, excuse the language, because it's very difficult, it's very challenging and it can be enormously rewarding. I guess the point is no one person or firm designs a city. The city is not big architecture and must not be treated as big architecture. You can design a framework or a structure plan with a whole lot of people involved in the right sort of processes, but you've got to allow flexibility around what happens in the richness and adaptation. And I guess scope for a variety of architecture and initiatives of all kinds. I guess there is a risk when you get ultimate control of form, and this is how it's going to be. That is associated with control of actions of what people can do in parts of the city. Where you can do this and where you can do that, and also control of the visual environment. You get monotony when there's too much repetition of things with only a single entity design big chunks. Now, the second point is that the city is never finished, nor should it be. You've got to take a long-term view about urban design and meaning it. Now, for me, the waterfront concept plan was the most challenging and wonderful experience it was also following that one of the most destructive experiences. My take was to hang in there because there were some good ideas about how the waterfront could be done. It's critical to Wellington City, and it needed to be sort of shepherded through. There's definitely the long-term view. Now, the third point is the public is the client. Just as in architecture, you have a client. In urban design, you can say the public is the client, even if you're being paid by council or by a developer or by somebody else. Because if as an urban designer you're not representing the public's interest, who is? And so you've got to come back to that. Now, with the public as a client, it's critical to talk to people. You talk to a client as an architect, if in fact you were designed to a house for some clients and you had no discussion whatsoever and you landed complete working drawings on the table, they'd probably tell you to go away and they wouldn't pay you. So it's probably no surprise that in certain types of your design project that demand some degree of public input, if there isn't that dialogue, the same thing happens. But there's real value in doing that because the public have intelligence about what's important to them, about their values, and as designers you need to know that. They can give feedback on how they might respond to what comes out of it, and that's really valuable. And I guess in relation to that, good projects need policies and urban design rely on many people, the public, but also a big team of people, just like a complex architectural project. Lots of inputs.
Well, we'll come back to some of those issues in a minute, both multidisciplinary nature of urban design, as well as the specifics of civic experience.